You have noticed in the last year or two that you are more irritable than you used to be. Not in obvious ways. Not in ways that have caused a confrontation or required an apology, or at least not often. Just a lowering of the threshold. Things that used to slide past you now snag. A small frustration that you would have managed without effort now requires effort to manage. And the mood in the 90 minutes after lunch, particularly after certain lunches, drops in a way that feels physiological rather than situational, as if something in the body is causing it, not something in the day. And there is something else. A quality to certain afternoons that is harder to name. Not sadness, not the fog of illness. A flatness. Things that used to bring mild pleasure, a program you enjoyed, a phone call with someone you like, produce something slightly less than they used to. The pleasure is there. It is just quieter. You have attributed these things, reasonably, to the changes that come with this stage of life. The body is different. The circumstances are different. The moods shift. This is age. But what if it is not only age? What if a significant portion of what you are experiencing, the irritability, the post-meal mood drops, the flattened pleasure response, is being generated in real time by a specific category of food? And what if the research tracking the cognitive trajectory of adults over 60 who eat this food regularly has found something measurable enough and alarming enough that it changes how urgent this conversation is? At around the 9-minute mark, I am going to show you what a 2022 cohort study found about the rate of cognitive decline in adults over 60 who eat ultra-processed food regularly compared to those who do not. The number in that study is not a theoretical risk. It is a measured acceleration, a specific percentage by which the cognitive clock is running faster. Stay with me for it. Because it changes what the question, "Does it really matter?" means in the context of what you eat this week. I have spent more than 3 decades in geriatric medicine. The cluster of changes I have just described, the lowered irritability threshold, the post-meal mood volatility, the quieter pleasure response, the background mental flatness, is one of the most consistent presentations I encounter in adults over 60 whose diets have shifted, often gradually and often without the person recognizing it as a shift, toward what researchers now classify as ultra-processed food. And it is almost never attributed to the diet, because the connection between what goes into the body at lunch and what the brain does at 3 in the afternoon is not one that the standard clinical conversation covers. Let me give you the mechanism. And let me start with a way of thinking about it that makes the urgency of the research comprehensible rather than just alarming. Think of junk food as running a dirty generator in an enclosed space. The generator is necessary, the body needs fuel, and food is that fuel. But the quality of the fuel determines the quality of the exhaust. A dirty generator, high sugar, high seed oil, high additive, low fiber food produces exhaust in the form of neuroinflammatory compounds, reactive oxygen species, blood glucose volatility signals, and dopamine pathway disruption. In a body with effective ventilation, a younger body with robust antioxidant capacity, an intact blood-brain barrier, and microglia that are not already in a state of low-level priming, the exhaust disperses before it accumulates to harmful levels. After 60, the ventilation has reduced. The antioxidant reserves that would neutralize the reactive oxygen species from processed food are at a lower baseline. The blood-brain barrier that would prevent neuroinflammatory signals from entering the brain is more permeable. The microglia, the brain's resident immune cells, are already in a state of low-level activation from the background inflammaging of age. The exhaust from the same dirty generator that dispersed harmlessly at 40 now accumulates. Daily. In the space where mood, memory, attention, and emotional regulation live. And the accumulation is measurable, quantifiably, in the cognitive trajectory of people who eat this way. Here is what that accumulation looks like in 3 specific biological pathways. The first is neuroinflammation from ultra-processed food components. Ultra-processed foods, the classification that covers fast food, packaged snacks, biscuits, crisps, soft drinks, instant noodles, mass-produced bread, and most convenience meals, contain a specific combination of components that activate the brain's immune system through pathways that do not require an infection to trigger them. Refined carbohydrates produce rapid glucose spikes. The subsequent oxidative chemistry generates advanced glycation end products, AGEs, compounds that bind to specific receptors on immune cells throughout the body, including microglia in the brain, triggering an inflammatory signal that does not resolve because the dietary pattern producing it recurs at every meal. Trans fats and the oxidized polyunsaturated fatty acids in reheated and industrially processed seed oils activate nuclear factor kappa B, the master inflammatory transcription factor covered in the kitchen chemicals and packaged foods discussions. In an acute context, NF-kappa B activation is appropriate. In a chronic dietary context, it maintains a continuous low-level inflammatory state in both body and brain. High sodium, present in ultra-processed food at levels that dwarf whole food, has a specific effect that most dietary discussions do not mention. It directly impairs the integrity of the tight junction proteins in the blood-brain barrier. The same protein structures that prevent inflammatory molecules, LPS, and microplastics from entering the brain are weakened by sustained high dietary sodium. The wall becomes more permeable, the exhaust passes through more easily, but the most significant component in the neuroinflammatory story of junk food is also the least visible. The combination of high sugar and high fat simultaneously stimulates toll-like receptors on microglia, the same receptors that respond to bacterial infection, in a way that neither component produces alone. The microglia cannot distinguish between a bacterial threat and the chemical signature of a biscuit and a soft drink consumed together. They respond to both with the same activation cascade. The brain's immune response fires for a meal. And in a brain where the microglia are already in a state of low-level activation from the inflammaging of 60-plus years, the additional stimulus from daily junk food pushes the neuroinflammatory state further than the background aging process alone would take it. The 2022 cohort study, published in JAMA Neurology and following more than 10,000 older adults over 10 years, found that those in the highest quartile of ultra-processed food consumption showed a 28% faster rate of global cognitive decline compared to those in the lowest quartile. Not a tendency toward decline, a measurably accelerated rate. The cognitive clock, already running, was running faster, and it was running faster specifically in proportion to how much ultra-processed food the person was eating. That number, 28% faster, is what earns the word alarming in the title of this video. I want you to stay with that number while I show you the second pathway, because it is running alongside the first one simultaneously in the same brain at every meal. The second pathway is dopamine system blunting. Ultra-processed food is engineered. This is not a conspiracy claim. It is an acknowledged industry practice. The combination of sugar, fat, and salt is calibrated to what food scientists call the bliss point, the precise ratio that maximizes activation of the dopamine reward circuit in the brain. The same neural pathway involved in addictive substance response is activated by engineered food, and the degree of activation is measurably greater than that produced by whole, unprocessed food. The mental health consequence of this is not immediate pleasure. It is what chronic, repeated, high-amplitude dopamine activation produces over time: receptor blunting. When the dopamine reward system is regularly hit with high-amplitude signals from engineered food, the system down-regulates its own sensitivity. Receptor density decreases. The response to the same stimulus weakens. More is required to produce the same effect. More significantly, the blunted system responds with less amplitude to the moderate pleasures of ordinary life. The conversation, the walk, the program, the phone call, these produce lower dopamine responses in a system that has been routinely exposed to higher amplitude engineered signals. The world becomes neurochemically quieter, less rewarding. Not because the world has changed, but because the neural machinery that processes reward has been progressively recalibrated downward by the food. After 60, this effect is amplified by the natural decline in dopamine system plasticity that accompanies aging. Dopamine receptor density and dopamine transporter efficiency naturally reduce with age. An already quieting reward system encounters junk food's blunting effect on a neurochemical baseline that has less reserve than at 40. The functional anhedonia, the slightly flattened pleasure response, the things that used to bring mild joy now producing mild nothing, is the subjective experience of this double effect. Aging dopamine decline plus junk food-driven receptor blunting. This is also the mechanism that makes junk food specifically compelling in the circumstances that often accompany older age, anhedonia, retirement, reduced social contact, the loss of a partner, or of professional purpose. When the available natural dopamine stimuli in a day are fewer, the engineered high-amplitude signal of a biscuit or a takeaway meal occupies a greater proportion of the day's reward economy. The dependency deepens not from weakness of character but from the proportional significance of the stimulus in a reduced reward landscape. Now, the third pathway, and then what I told you to stay for. The third pathway is blood sugar volatility and the cortisol-anxiety cycle. A high-sugar meal or snack produces a rapid glucose spike. The pancreas releases insulin. Blood glucose falls, often falling below baseline as the insulin response slightly overshoots, producing a mild hypoglycemic state approximately 60 to 90 minutes after consumption. In response to this glucose drop, the adrenal glands release cortisol and adrenaline to raise blood glucose back to normal. Cortisol and adrenaline are stress hormones. Their release is the body's emergency response to what it interprets as low-fuel crisis. And the physiological state they produce, key, heightened vigilance, muscle tension, irritability, difficulty concentrating, a generalized sense of threat, is indistinguishable at the subjective level from anxiety. This is the mechanism behind the irritability I described at the beginning of this video. The lowered threshold after lunch, the mood that drops approximately 90 minutes after eating something sweet or processed. It is not a personality trait. It is a cortisol spike generated by the blood glucose crash caused by the food. And the person experiencing it, who does not connect a mid-afternoon mood to what they had at 1 o'clock, attributes it to their circumstances, their personality, or the natural mood variability of older age. After 60, the blood glucose regulation system is less precise than at 45. The insulin response to a glucose spike is larger and less accurately calibrated. The subsequent crash is deeper. The cortisol response to that crash is stronger and more prolonged. And the impact of that cortisol on the brain, particularly on the hippocampus, which has cortisol receptors and whose function is acutely sensitive to cortisol exposure, is more significant in a brain that is already carrying an elevated background neuroinflammatory burden from the other two pathways. 3 generators, all producing exhaust, all running in the same enclosed space, all simultaneously. Now, the 9-minute mark, and the part of this picture that provides the most important reframe. The finding I mentioned, the 28% faster cognitive decline, is alarming. But the research on the speed of dietary intervention offers the same information in reverse. The SMILES trial, the first randomized controlled trial of dietary intervention for major depression in adults, found that participants who shifted from a poor quality to a Mediterranean-style diet showed measurable reductions in depression and anxiety symptoms within 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3 weeks. The dietary anti-inflammatory effect on the brain operates on a timescale of days to weeks, not the months or years that most people associate with lifestyle change. The corollary, the truly alarming part, is that this speed works in both directions. If the improvement comes within 3 weeks of eating well, the damage was accumulating within 3 weeks of eating badly. The cognitive clock was not accelerated by years of junk food. It was being accelerated by weeks of it, daily. The exhaust was building daily in an enclosed space, and the space was showing the accumulation daily, in mood, in irritability, in the quieter pleasure response, in the slightly slower word retrieval. The alarm is not that the damage is permanent. The alarm is that it is happening now, at the speed of each meal, in a brain that feels it as something other than what it is. A patient of mine, a retired civil servant, early 70s, whose daughter had brought him to the appointment because she was concerned about a change that had come over him in the 18 months since his wife had died. He was more irritable. He was snapping at the grandchildren in ways her father had never done. He was losing the thread of conversations. He was not cooking. He was eating takeaway food, packets of biscuits, crisps, soft drinks, convenience meals. Not because he did not know better, because the motivation to cook for one had not returned since his wife's death, and the junk food was there, and it hit the reward system in the few moments each day that did not feel flat. His standard panel was unremarkable. His cognitive assessment came back at 26 out of 30, lower than expected for his education, but not in the diagnostic range for any condition. His HS-CRP was 4.2. His BDNF was at the lower boundary of the reference range. The dietary change was not presented as a prescription. It was presented as an experiment, with his daughter's involvement. She would cook 2 whole food meals a week at her home. He would eat with her family on those days. He replaced soft drinks with water and herbal tea. He agreed to stop buying biscuits and crisps and replace them with whole nuts and fruit, acknowledging this would take adjustment. He ate oily fish, sardines or mackerel, twice a week as a specific omega-3 intervention. At 6 weeks, his daughter reported that he had snapped at her grandchildren twice in 6 weeks. Before the change, it had been several times per week. At 3 months, she described his mood as more like her father than at any point since his wife had died. At the 5-month review, his cognitive assessment came back at 28 out of 30, 2 points higher than his baseline. His HSCRP had fallen to 1.6. His neurologist, reviewing the cognitive score improvement, asked what had changed. His daughter described the food. The neurologist acknowledged that this was not a conversation she had thought to initiate at the previous appointment. The generator was now running cleaner. The ventilation was not what it was at 50, but the exhaust was no longer accumulating, and the space was clearing. Same man, same age. Cleaned the generator. Opened a window. The brain began to function in air that was a little closer to what it was designed to breathe. Here is what I want you to take from this video into your kitchen and your next appointment. The first. This week, eliminate one category of junk food and replace it with one specific whole food alternative. Choose the category you consume most often. If it is soft drinks, replace with water and 1 or 2 cups of herbal tea daily. If it is biscuits, crisps, or packaged snacks, replace with whole unsalted nuts. If it is takeaway food, replace 1 takeaway meal this week with oily fish, leafy vegetables, and olive oil. Omega-3 from oily fish is the single fastest dietary anti-inflammatory intervention available to a senior without a prescription. Studies show measurable reductions in the neuroinflammatory markers from junk food within 2 weeks of regular oily fish consumption. 1 meal, this week. The second, track the 90-minute mood window this week. Each time you eat something that falls into the ultra-processed category, note your mood on a simple scale of 1 to 10 at approximately 90 minutes afterward. Do not change the diet yet if you have not started. Just observe. The pattern of mood drop 60 to 90 minutes after high sugar or highly processed food is the blood glucose crash cortisol signature. Seeing it in your own daily data is the single most motivating observation available for dietary change, because it connects the food to the specific mental health experience you are having in real time. The third, ask your GP at your next appointment using these exact words. I have been reading about the relationship between ultra-processed food intake and cognitive decline rate in adults over 60, specifically data showing a 28% faster cognitive trajectory with high UPF intake. Given my recent cognitive assessment and my dietary pattern, would it be worth measuring my HSCRP and establishing a dietary biomarker baseline now so we can track whether dietary improvement affects the inflammatory markers and the cognitive trajectory together? This question does something specific. It connects the cognitive assessment score to a dietary biomarker and asks for a tracking framework. A GP who is paying attention will welcome this. Let me bring you back to where this began. The irritability that surprised you, the mood that drops after lunch, the pleasure that is quieter than it was, the things you have been attributing to aging and circumstances and the natural variability of this stage of life. The generator is running dirty. The ventilation after 60 is reduced. The exhaust, neuroinflammation, dopamine blunting, cortisol spikes from glucose volatility is accumulating in the space where your mood, your memory, your patience, and your capacity for pleasure live. And the 28% faster clock is not a forecast. It is a current measurement of what is happening now, but the direction reverses at the same speed it accumulates. The research shows 3 weeks for measurable mental health improvement from dietary change. Not 3 years. 3 weeks of a cleaner generator in a slightly more open space. The brain at 60 is not beyond this. The clock is running. The question is whether it is running faster than it needs to. Over the next 7 days, track the 90-minute mood window every time you eat something ultra-processed. Note the food. Note the mood score 90 minutes later. 7 days of observations. Because next week, I am going to show you the 3 specific anti-inflammatory foods that the research identifies as the most potent neuroinflammatory countermeasures available in a dietary context, and the specific order in which to introduce them based on which pathway is most active in your case. Your mood tracking data from this week will show me exactly which of the three generators is running loudest in your situation and which fuel change will produce the fastest, most noticeable mental health improvement. Come back with 7 days of observations. What I show you next week will tell you precisely where to start. One important note before you go. Everything in this video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for the advice of your personal physician or registered dietitian. Please do not make significant dietary changes without discussing them with your doctor, particularly if you manage blood sugar with medication. Dietary changes affect blood glucose significantly and may require medication adjustment. If you are experiencing depression, significant anxiety, or cognitive symptoms that are affecting your daily function, please discuss these with your GP rather than relying solely on dietary change. The goal of this video is to give you a more complete picture of what specific food choices are doing to your brain's environment after 60D and better questions to bring to the people who can help you act on it. That conversation is where the real change can begin safely and effectively.